Hey, remember the MCU? You know, those movies that literally everyone refused to shut up about for what felt like decades? That franchise that dominated the box office to the point that one of its most boring and lackluster movies made $1 billion. Purely because it was released when the hype was at its zenith? I'm sure you do remember. After all, Endgame was barely 5 years ago, and yet in the relatively short time since the end of the Infinity Saga, this behemoth has dwindled to a meager shadow of its former self, constantly delaying projects if not outright canceling them, and the movies and shows that have actually made it out of production hell have rarely even ascended to the heights of mediocrity, let alone the critical and popular acclaim that their predecessors won time after time. And lest we forget, that praise was earned. The barrage of MCU productions over the past few years, some of which have been enjoyable, but most of which have been utterly forgettable or just downright terrible, might taint our perception of the franchise as a whole. Marvel Studios is now synonymous with content for content's sake and vapid self-expression, but it wasn't always that way. Those movies used to inspire and edify us. They were more than just brilliantly colored costumes against garish CGI backdrops. They weren't a revolving door of familiar names attached to unfamiliar faces. They understood the difference between ham-fisted injections of this week's social issue and genuine examinations of political ideas. They didn't try to shove agendas down our throats, they spoke to our hearts. They explored timeless themes such as idealism and freedom, loyalty to what truly matters, and the responsibility that comes with strength and power. They meant something. They knew they meant something, too. One of the most easily leveled claims against the MCU of recent years is that practically every serious moment is undercut by a joke or a quip. See, for example, the trailer of a yet unreleased movie, Thunderbolts.
She's bulletproof. What happened to bulletproof? It's bulletproof-ish.
This is supposedly a story about a bunch of villains tasked with some secretive and possibly insidious work that only they can be called upon to do. And yet the director, or at least the director of this trailer, seems deathly afraid of letting us experience that darker tone, of being taken seriously.
Look at you. So adorable.
And this is, if you ask me, a defense mechanism. The attitude seems to be, we're Marvel, we're telling silly stories about people in colorful costumes. We can't have people think that we think that our movies are actually genuinely thought-provoking or meaningful. So let's subvert every otherwise intense moment with a lighthearted quip. People don't like being laughed at. People especially hate it when they attempt to be serious, and everyone laughs at them anyway. But the MCU is not supposed to be the class clown bullied into a perpetually comedic role by the more popular kids who think they're better than him because they, I don't know, have more grayscale in their wardrobe. I've made not a living, but a relatively successful YouTube career out of showing that there is in fact depth and meaning in stories that, because of how they look, people who style themselves so very grown up would dismiss out of hand. Those stories could only succeed if they were not afraid to take themselves seriously. So let us revisit a time when the minds behind the MCU were similarly unafraid. I could pick any number of movies for this example, but perhaps the best counterpoint to the silliness of the modern MCU is the intense, dark, gritty, and excellent film Captain America and the Winter Soldier. What exactly made this movie so good? How did it speak to its audience? Why did it mean something? For one thing, as I just said, it wasn't afraid to take itself seriously. Yes, the story that contains a man's brain stored on a hard drive, a dude flying around with metal wings, and someone wearing a costume stolen from a museum into battle also had one of the darkest tones of the franchise. But of course it did. The major conflict of the movie was our hero's race to stop the murder, or rather assassination, of millions of people deemed too troublesome by an AI's predictive analytics. A threat that only materialized because the good guys were too concerned with a good and mistook it for the highest good, or at least one worth a significant compromise of principle.
S.H.I.E.L.D. takes the world as it is, not as we'd like it to be.
That good being safety, people's ability to live peacefully because they know that the government has an omniscient eye in the sky attached to the world's longest sniper rifle. Who wouldn't sleep soundly at night knowing that good old Uncle Sam could put hot lead through your skull at any moment? See, this is how you do political art. properly. The struggle to maintain both safety and freedom was not a new issue in 2014, and that incredibly difficult balancing act will, I dare say, continue to plague citizens and lawmakers around the world until civilization itself comes to an end.
This isn't freedom. This is fear.
You could take the message of this theme, that safety cannot be held up as an absolute good in a free society, and apply it to whatever current debate you want. It's not about the political argument of the week. It's about an idea, a struggle that all of us have to face, even if we don't consciously realize it as soon as we choose to step outside our door.
Remember what Bilbo used to say? It's a dangerous business, Frodo.
Going out your door?
It's just bigger here. The exploration of that theme shows that this movie has a philosophy, which it will explore through the varied worldviews and ideals of its characters. Captain America is not a particularly easy guy to write. After all, the guy just can't change that much. The audience doesn't want him to change. He's the American hero, the red, white, and blue Boy Scout. He is supposed to be the embodiment of what is best in all of us. Giving a paragon of virtue a character arc is no easy task, but Winter Soldier accomplishes it deftly by making Steve Rogers question his loyalty, by forcing him to ask, who do I fight for?
For as long as I can remember, I just wanted to do what was right. Guess I'm not quite sure what that is anymore.
You could absolutely take that decision of the writers as commentary on the effect that fighting overseas has on members of America's military. But the beauty of well-written stories such as this one is that such commentary is not shoved in your face, that there's more depth and nuance to it. Such an issue is, after all, incredibly complex. Presenting it in this manner, letting us witness a character whom we have come to love struggle with his loyalty, lets us ponder the theme of this story. Good art makes you think about its subject matter. Bad art, or rather activism posing as art, tells you what to think. Captain America and the Winter Soldier might urge you to reconsider, who or what am I really loyal to? What people, what ideas will I fight for when everything else has been torn down or ripped away? One might say that this movie shows the destruction of Cap's idealism.
Where did Captain America learn how to steal a car?
Nazi Germany, and we're borrowing. Take your feet off the dash.
As the organization which he served so long and so loyally is found to be rotten to its core, the complete opposite of everything he thought he stood for. I wouldn't interpret it that way, however. The events of Winter Soldier do not destroy the idealism of Steve Rogers. They perfect it. They reforge it. The hottest fire, after all, produces the strongest steel. Regardless of how much he might doubt the people and institutions he once trusted, Cap never compromises on his principles. This quote won't come up till the next Captain America movie, but it's only appropriate for me to deploy it here. Doesn't matter what the press says. Doesn't matter what the politicians or the mobs say. Doesn't matter if the whole country decides that something wrong is something right. This nation was founded on one principle above all else: the requirement that we stand up for what we believe, no matter the odds or the consequences. When the mob and the press and the whole world tell you to move, your job is to plant yourself like a tree beside the river of truth and tell the whole world, no, you move. Captain America questions his loyalty in that he questions his judgment as to whether or not the people he has chosen to follow are in fact worthy of his loyalty. He can and must progress through that journey, which serves as his main character arc for the film, while still remaining unflinching in his loyalty to what matters. That is, the lives of the American people, and of course, that of his friend. Wait, sorry, wrong friend. Yeah, him. Although, I should talk about Black Widow in this film, especially since I just mentioned the River of Truth, and she has some thoughts about the nature of truth.
The truth is a matter of circumstance. It's not all things to all people, all the time.
One of the many hallmarks of a well-written story is that it allows its heroes to differ. What Natasha said is not a sentiment that Steve Rogers would agree with, but it makes perfect sense coming from the mouth of a lifelong spy who has fought on all sides of any number of conflicts and has stayed alive by twisting the truth into an unknowable number of fascinating knots. I'm still thoroughly annoyed that they completely botched her origin story movie, by the way. Black Widow deserved far, far better than Pheromone Man. But anyway, rather than getting lost in the weeds talking about the harms of such relativistic viewpoints, I'll let Natasha herself do that.
I thought I knew whose lies I was telling, but I guess I can't tell the difference anymore.
which sounds remarkably similar to Cap's struggle during the movie, just from a spy's point of view rather than a soldier's. There's more character work done in those 2 lines of Natasha's dialogue than there was in all 6 episodes of Echo. You forgot that show existed, didn't you? That's okay, I did too. Anyway, like I was saying, Winter Soldier manages the relationship between these 2 very different heroes fantastically. Each is his own person, from personality to ideal to fighting style, which leads me to yet another Natasha Romanov appreciation moment. She doesn't feature prominently in the action scenes, which makes sense as her name isn't in the movie's title, but when she does, it is done so well. When she goes up against Bucky, she knows she's outmatched, so she fights through distraction and surprise, disarming him and attempting to strangle him before he can realize what's happening. And then when that doesn't work out, she gets lost, because she's a spy who has no business facing a super soldier head on. A spy who has absolutely no qualms about hitting him directly with a grenade launcher. Whatever gets the job done. Again, quite a different attitude from that of Steve Rogers, whose fighting style is more restrained and straightforward, if not necessarily less deadly. That is, until the finale. Wait, hang on. Sorry, we'll get there in a moment, but let me take an extra minute to praise the movie for the scenes in which Cap broadcasts his revelation and kicks off the Civil War within S.H.I.E.L.D. headquarters. 2 things I want to highlight. First, the flight controller who refuses to move when Rumlow has a gun trained on him. Those few seconds he saved by delaying the helicarrier's launch turned out to be quite important. Bro is a real one. Second is Bucky's rampage through the S.H.I.E.L.D. pilots who were trying to give Captain Rogers some air support. Not exactly inspiring, but an excellent bad guy moment that rivals and, I dare say, surpasses Darth Vader's Rogue One hallway scene. Sometimes it's hard for me to work my appreciation for moments like this seamlessly into a script, but I couldn't bring myself to not talk about them. Anyway, back to the final 1v1. Cap is perfectly, if not happy, then at least willing to wail on Bucky until his mission is complete and, he has saved millions of unsuspecting people from having their brains blown out. But once the innocents are out of harm's way and it's him or his friend, Steve chooses Bucky. It's not that Cap wouldn't have been justified in fighting. He had every right to defend himself. He'd even been advised that the Bucky he knew was likely long gone.
Whoever he used to be, the guy he is now, I don't think he's the kind you save. He's the kind you stop.
But he took a chance anyway.
I'm not gonna fight you. You're my friend.
Which is probably the first time that Captain America ever gambled. He took a chance that somewhere inside the man opposite him, his friend still lived. He decided that he'd rather die than live the rest of his life wondering if he'd killed a man whom he could have saved. Killing the Winter Soldier was the safe choice, but one made out of fear. In choosing to save his own life, Steve could have cost his best friend his freedom. He doesn't die, of course, because this is still relatively early on in the Infinity Saga, but for that character in that moment, that choice was real. And because it was, it means something to us. Stories like this are real because they display true heroism, true loyalty, true courage, the likes of which can rarely, if ever, be found in real life. They lift us up, inspire us, and push us to imitate the real and genuine virtues displayed by the fantastic and otherworldly heroes on screen. The MCU, not to mention Hollywood as a whole, has lost so much of what made it special and meaningful because it is now far too preoccupied with whether or not its cast of characters looks like its audience, instead of dreaming up stories of great heroism in which those characters inspire the audience to want to be like them. So Marvel Studios, please, take yourself seriously again. Your stories matter, or, well, they should. We want them to. We want them to mean something once more.